You're listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors, where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Jonny Rashid. I use he, him pronouns.
I'm Rachel Sensenig. I use she, her pronouns.
Julie Hoke, she, her.
And I'm Ben White, he, him.
We got a great show for you. In the middle of it, I'm going to interview my brother. He's not my literal brother, but he feels like my real brother, Julius Rivera, about what it's like to love your neighbor. It is such a rich conversation, and Julius is such a good talker. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. But in the beginning, we're going to do some talk back, and it's really the talk back in general is centered on extending the table of our dialogue. And when we say that, we mean we're actually trying to build a real relationship with you. And Ben's going to show us how some of that's actually happening.
Yeah, relationships happen and get maintained across many miles and time. And I'm really glad that we get to extend the table of our dialogue via this podcast, because really it's really just us talking, right? We don't have Jonny has been doing some great interviews, of course, extending the dialogue to folks that we are connected with across the Christian movement and in our church. Certainly that's an extension of our dialogue, but the core of the podcast is just us. It's just us. And I think it's working because my friend Katie, who moved to Michigan 5 years ago, texted me out of the blue last night. Y'all know this, Katie. You remember Katie?
We know
Katie and Nate?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nate the Great, I call him. Because one time he brought a crock pot over to my house for dinner on his bicycle. And that was just such a feat.
Yes. I call them Canady because that's how they sign their Christmas cards.
Oh, wow. They're like a celebrity couple. So y'all can be friends with them, too. If you go to Marquette or if you write to us and say, I want to know these people. I'll give you their email, probably. Because that's where we're going. We're going for being known. Anyways, Katie texted me out of the blue, and she's like, I think you're the only person I know who probably read this book. And she sent me a picture of Jack by Marilyn Robinson. I'm like, darn right, I read that book. And it felt really good to be known in that way as a Marilyn Robinson fan. But also, as we continued our little text conversation while I was watching Downton Abbey, and I don't know what she was doing, she said, I felt like completely comfortable just texting you out of the blue after 5 years because I listen to you so often on the podcast. I feel like we're still friends.
Nice.
We got
And
listeners in Michigan. It's great.
Indeed, we are. We are still friends, Katie. I love you, and I love everyone listening, even if we've never met in person.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, something like that happened to me just last week. Our cell leaders met together in person for the first time in 18 months.
I was so sad to miss that, for what it's worth.
I know, you were on vacation. It was a lot of fun, and I introduced myself to someone who I did not recognize, and I was like, Trevor, have we met before? And he was like, yeah, I know you. And then he laughed, and he was like, well, I know you because I see you every week. I listen to you all the time, but through a screen, I don't get that connection with him. And so it was fun to realize how known I was because he is listening and he is connected with me. And I got to build that connection in the moment with him.
It's kind of a unique position we have as maybe not as famous as Canady, but we are we have this kind of being knownness without getting the opportunity to know everyone who knows us, which is kind of a head trip, kind of weird. So y'all gotta write us. We need to hear from you at the podcast email, which is, Jonny?
Resist and Restore podcast at circleofhope.net.
Resist and Restore podcast at circleofhope.net. Did you write it down? Resistant, because you're hearing this. It's not just, you can't just click it. If you go to circleofhope.church, though, we post all this stuff on our blog, and you could just click circleofhope.church. That's really easy. But just in case you're writing it down, you have a pen and paper, like some kind of 19th century person.
If you're driving, don't do this.
If you're driving, pull over and get a pen out of your glove compartment. You can do it. I mean, unless you're like on a really fast highway, that's kind of scary to then try to merge back in. So don't do that. But again, it's circle. No, it's not. What is it, Jonny?
Write down Resist and Restore podcast at circleofhope.net. It'll also be in the show notes too.
The show notes, which is where the show notes get published at circleofhope.church on our blog. So we want to hear from you. Talk back to what we're talking about. Tell us how much you know Rachel and Julie and Jonny and Ben, and make this table actually extended in fun ways, like even just being friends across the miles and across time. We love you.
And while you have your device out, go ahead and subscribe to this podcast from wherever you listen to it, and please offer us a review. Both of those things help other people connect with us, and we want to encourage and bless as many people as we can. We're not particularly concerned with how successful this is, but we want to make as much of a positive impact as we're able to, and you can help us do that by liking and subscribing. You can also share money with us. Go to circleofhope.church and you can find a way to give. You can give to our general common fund. You can write Resist and Restore however you like it, and it'll feel like love to us in many ways. So I hope that you can do that and join us to not just make this podcast flow, but make the whole church work too, and maybe even make your heart change a little bit too as you realize that Jesus is the Lord of our money. Maybe that'll be a moment for you as well. And then when you visit circleofhope.church, check out cells. We have in-person meetings. We have the at-home meeting. And we have a lot of ways that you can pray and connect with our mission and compassion teams. So this extension of our table is just a part of what we're doing, and you can be a part of so much more too, and we want you to be. Hey friends, I'm so glad to have Julius Rivera on our show. He's been a long-term member of Circle of Hope and born and bred in Philadelphia. Julius, will you introduce yourself to us?
I'm Julius Rivera. I'm a community organizer, East Kensington, a neighbor, Philly local, musician, special ed teacher.
Love having you here, man. Thanks so much for doing this. This is Galatians 5:14. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. How is it possible that the entire law of God in the Bible can be summed up with that commandment? What do you think? Like, how does that jive with you, brother?
So it's been very interesting as of late to reflect on this, because I feel like a lot of my Christian experience, both attending Christian schools and being involved in congregations, both as a child and as an adult, has been focused on being considerate of others, especially those who are suffering. And going through this particular time in history, we're being exposed to a lot of racial difference and how the experiences of Black and brown people is different than that of folks who are not. And one of the things that's pointed out is how frequently we have to accommodate others, often at our expense, in order to avoid causing drama or causing tension or what have you, or even keeping ourselves and our loved ones safe. So I think for most of my life, I just thought I was just a person who was always thinking about other people and helping to accommodate others. And that's what we're all ideally taught to do. But I'm also learning that the fact that I was born into poverty and a brown person sort of amplified that, because we have to do a lot of accommodating and thinking of others in order to be well and survive in our society.
What does that look like for you? You're Circle of Hope. Full disclosure, we got a lot of transplants, people that moved here from Philadelphia. I mean, that, and I did too when I was 18. I've been here since I was an adult, but I wasn't born and bred in Philly. Right. But as a lifelong Philadelphian, you're talking about the kind of accommodation you needed to do to survive. What did you learn about being a good neighbor growing up in this town?
My childhood was spent in North Philly. And living there, we had immense cultural diversity, but we did not have socioeconomic diversity. So everyone who lived in my neighborhood was poor. Some of the people were temporarily poor.
Sure.
Other people were generationally poor. And so some of the people that I remember being temporarily poor were a lot of immigrant neighbors. I remember having a Vietnamese family that lived in the middle of our block that I hung out with, and we were cool, and they moved away. They had a food truck. And so, as I got older, I realized that they had to live in the poor place in order to get established. Once they got established, well, then they moved on to a better situation. Whereas, there are many of my neighbors that I grew up with who weren't able to move away and are still there or are still in similar neighborhoods instead of moving into better neighborhoods or, preferred circumstances. So yeah, that experience was distinctive because there was a lot of opportunity for interacting with people who were coming from a different place than you were. But at the end of the day, because of poverty, it forced a lot of interaction and connection with neighbors rather than isolation. So I was not isolated as a child. I interacted with the kids. We played on the street and hung out with each other. We visited each other's houses. Sometimes we went to church together. Like there were a lot of different opportunities for neighbors to interact with other neighbors.
And you think poverty in part made those relationships possible, is what you're saying?
Yes, because at the end of the day, there was a lot of opportunity for people to help each other out. So, for example, a lot of people couldn't afford childcare. So if the kid came home after school and a parent wasn't able to get home before the child got home, well, then it was reasonable for that child to end up hanging out at someone else's home or for one of the other, families on the block to look out for that child until the parent got home. And so if you think about having means, well, then you just pay for a nanny or a sitter or what have you. And, you don't have to rely on someone else to offer that service or barter that service.
Sure. Makes sense.
Whereas we did tons and tons of bartering at that time.
So there's just a lot more interdependence in a community like that. And that really creates something more neighborly.
Absolutely.
Was that also, you moved to Hagert Street in East Kensington. When did you do that?
It's 20 years ago. So whenever that was.
So early 2000s, really?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we planted our church in Fishtown, Frankfurt Ave, around 2003. You were there before, and you were one of the core people that started that thing.
Yes.
And boy, Hagert Street has dramatically changed over the last 20 years.
Yes, sir.
So, like, as you're seeing the changes around you, you're a homeowner, and we don't have to get into specifics, but the price you bought your house at is a lot different than what it's worth now.
Absolutely.
What has it meant to be a good neighbor then? And even your experience, growing up in poverty, Julius, what's it like to essentially all of that changes because you happen to live in a neighborhood that used to be poor that all of a sudden is wealthy? I mean, that's incidental upward mobility, What's that? What does that do for you? What happened?
When I was studying urban sociology, I was aware of this idea, but it's a whole other thing to experience it firsthand. The idea of neighborhoods being divested from, and then sending in artists to sort of pave the way for making the space more conducive for wealthier people. Sure. And then eventually, making it so that way now this is a chic niche kind of place versus, a dilapidated, divested space. So to some degree, I was a part of the transition. And, I have mixed emotions about it, because something that I'm realizing now is that a lot of the work that I put into the community organizing was made for the neighbors that were here at that time. And because of all the changes that have occurred around me, they don't get to benefit from it by being here. They may have benefited from it by profiting from selling their house and moving to a place where they prefer. But in terms of, creating a neighborhood that is safer and has more opportunities for children and all that kind of stuff, it was built for the children, like I said earlier, who were in poverty and didn't have safe places to go. And so now we don't have that many children like that in the community anymore. Now most of the kids have the ability to bring their parents with them.
Exactly. So there's a big difference, right? So I think this is noteworthy. In an area where there are a high percentage of owner-occupiers, which, by the way, there are neighborhoods in Philadelphia where poor people can own homes. That's possible. Maybe not everyone knows that. When those neighborhoods' value increases, some people that grew up in that neighborhood sell their house. They sell their grandma's house, get a lot of money, move somewhere else, right? And I live in North Philly, so there's a lot of generational home ownership happening here. They live in their parents' house or their grandma's house. So actually that development can be good for people. But for people that you're saying, we as a community organizer, I helped make this neighborhood safer and better for children. A lot of these kids aren't here anymore. So what's it like for you over the last 20 years? Because I remember when the lot across your street, there was no playground in that lot, and you were working on making Hagert Street Playground a thing. By the time it became something, were a lot of the kids you were imagining playing on the playground not there anymore?
Yes. And I think even though the playground existed, it was deteriorated and not a safe place. And it wasn't a place that was respected. And so, we did the work to make it a respectable place before it was renovated. And then the community garden, the play garden, was much more tied into my personal development. And so even though the children that I started the work for aren't here to enjoy it, it doesn't mean that there aren't children and families here that should be able to enjoy it.
Sure.
You understand what I'm saying? And
absolutely.
So, they are things that should be preserved and should be loved and groomed and all that kind of stuff for all visitors, for all users. They're public and semi-public places for families. And so at the end of the day, the point is to offer places for families to be that didn't require money, that didn't require, any type of membership or something.
Sure.
And so, they're good places, and it's good that they exist. With the pandemic affecting divested neighborhoods more than neighborhoods that are not divested from, I was in a difficult place reflecting on how the community that I live in now doesn't need as much support as communities that are a few hundred feet away. So if you cross Lehigh, the neighbors on that side are struggling in a way deeper way than the neighbors that are directly next to me here in East Kensington. And so I've spent all these years trying to create a green space on the block so that children can run around on green grass, because we don't have a lot of safe green spaces within the area where you don't need to cross a large street. So we're sort of in the middle of a bunch of spaces where there's very limited opportunities for children, especially toddlers, to enjoy green space that doesn't have, dangerous things in it. Sure. And so that space is created, and, the community is now helping to preserve it. If you go to McPherson Park, which is not far from us, there's a bunch of grass and trees. It's a wonderful green space that the children of the community cannot use because it's not safe.
And this is, you said above Lehigh, right? That's where and McPherson is above Lehigh, right on Indiana. Now I know you might not know the street names I'm talking about, y'all, but in that area north of Lehigh, you might know about this because it's kind of national news.
Right.
McPherson Park is in the center of the opioid crisis in Philadelphia. So when he says it's not safe, that's what he means, right? Am I right? Am I feeling you?
Yes. And so, it's a huge struggle because, again, a lot of poor folks are accustomed to trying to be as considerate as possible. So a lot of the neighbors that are trying to organize there, some of whom are very comfortable with the idea of, just get rid of the addicts and the homeless people that are making the safe on space. And I don't care where you put them, just get them out of here. But most of the neighbors that I've interacted with, most of the people that are working in the community are saying, no, we care about what happens with these folks that are making it unsafe for our kids to play in this space. We don't want it to be an either or. We want it to be a both and. We want them to get access to care. We want them to get access to homes. We don't want their lives to be this, right? This is not good for them. So we care about them and we want them to be well. But we would also like our kids to be able to run in the grass without wondering if they're going to get pricked by a hypodermic needle.
So Julius is, I hope the listening audience can hear this. These relationships are complicated. There is no zero sum here. It's not like I either care about the kids in the neighborhood or I care about these people suffering from addiction or these homeless people. A lot of times, loving your neighbor means holding all that tension and just living in the complexity of it. East Kensington is the neighborhood you live in.
Yes.
And East Kensington, when I lived there, you crossed Frankfurt Ave, and it was the more diverse and poorer neighborhood relative to Fishtown. That's all changed. So East Kensington isn't exactly that, It's still more diverse, I would say, than Fishtown, but the houses are more expensive. Let's just say that. Yes. So now you have long-term residents who are of different races there, because East Kensington was always kind of diverse between Black, Latino, and white people. Mm-hmm. And then newcomers who are mainly white and professional occupying new construction. You can even tell when you're walking through the neighborhood, the old house and the new house, it looks a lot different. What's it like to be a good neighbor in that diverse neighborhood? You said you grew up in a neighborhood that was diverse racially, not socioeconomically. Now you have one that is diverse socioeconomically and racially.
Yes. So obviously it has changed our goals and what we do, how we do. So socioeconomic diversity has definitely decreased the amount of face-to-face, on-the-ground interaction.
So wealthier neighbors don't interact the same way that you did growing up. You're noting that.
Absolutely. So there is a lot more isolation. What is a lot different is people tend to have different working schedules, tend to have different ways that they're celebrating, different times, so all of these differences make it so that way most of our non-deliberate interaction is just passing each other on the streets and between the houses and the cars. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, the work that we started back when the playground was in disarray, that continues to this day, makes it so that way the neighbors who choose to have a more deliberate connection have that opportunity. And so we interact digitally a lot. And so we'll ask questions, we'll share about things that we see, concerns that are coming up. Did you notice this? What do you guys think about that? And so we have this.
Like on social media?
We moved away from like Facebook into like Slack group and stuff that.
Cool.
And obviously we have cell phone numbers for each other and text and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot more dialogue and conversation that's happening digitally versus face-to-face and in-person stuff. Now, obviously, when it permits it, well, then we do have face-to-face events and all that kind of jazz. And obviously, COVID has affected the ability to do that. But one of the things that has always been a part of the threads that make up the community organizing work that we've been doing here are opportunities to work together. I'm a firm believer in service. It's my love language is service.
Wonderful.
So there's a lot of folks that like to do a lot of talking, and some people know me and know that I do talk a lot. But one of the things that I say all the time is, if you're talking to me, it's because we're doing something together.
Yeah, that's right.
If you don't do anything with me, then I'm not talking to you. You know what I mean? And so a lot of the neighbors have opted into trying to be connected to community and trying to negotiate that and figure that out. And, when there were opportunities for us to work together on projects, they came up, they showed up, and continue to show up. There's so much work that is being done in our neighborhood right now that I don't have to do directly, because the other neighbors have taken it on and are maintaining it and keeping the thing going. And it's all very organic and very beautiful.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Let's talk about different kinds of people and how we can be good neighbors to them. How are you a good neighbor to someone suffering with an opioid addiction? Some of them aren't even neighbors. They're here from Delaware County or Maryland,
So one of the things that my group struggled with was having someone who was drug addicted come and hang out inside of the playground.
Oh, wow.
So our playground is not a large playground. So, if you're in a large park like Rittenhouse or whatever, well, then somebody could be sitting on a bench over in the corner, and you could have kids playing over here, and there wouldn't be a lot of interaction between them or what have you. But in our playground, where the benches are is probably 3 feet away from playground equipment all around. There are no distant, far places for someone to be where they're going to be out of the way. So obviously, having someone who's clearly addicted being so close to children can feel uncomfortable and unsafe. And actually, you know what? It started out with it was an African-American man who was laying on the ground. He was on the ground. And so the question was, what do we do? How do we respond to this? Because him being here and laying on the ground is making it scary for the family who want to use the space. And so the initial response was, it's not wrong for an addicted person to be in a public space. This is a public playground. It's open to the public. So if he's going to be in the space, it's okay for him to be in the space. He has as much right to share in that public space as the people who have young children, right? If there's a bench in a nice open area, he's allowed to sit on it. And that's where we went first, is laying in a playground is not safe for him. And it doesn't create a safe environment because, we don't want anybody to step on him or kick him or whatever, you know what I mean? So that's not good for anyone. And so the initial response was to go over, wake him up, make sure he was okay, and to ask him to sit on the bench instead of laying on the ground. And so I did that. I went out, I told the group, I go and speak to him or whatever. Melissa is my, hey, let's remember we're dealing with humans checker. And so she brought water with her. And so we had the conversation, and we helped him clean up his stuff and get him seated on the bench. It was a hot day, so he eventually ended up back on the grass. So we went out again. And then later on, somebody else who came to use the park called the cops and got the police involved. And that person was just saying, oh, yeah, that's just what you have to do. You know, I'm a former police officer or whatever. You know what I mean? He like,
Yeah, totally.
I have, you know, this is the only way this thing gets done effectively, while we were in process of trying alternatives.
So you had a different way to do it, and then this person had just the conventional way to do it. Call the cops.
Yep. And so, you know, again, it was frustrating that was the end of the story, but I appreciate the fact that my neighbors and I were all working together and working through alternatives where we were calling, you know, the homeless hotline, and we were doing we were trying all of these other interventions instead of just resorting to, you know, well, we've got to use the power that we have to make the space, protect the space from the unwanted ones. And that's like, for me, thinking about who is us and who is them is very important. The minister pointed out how when Jesus does the Lord's Prayer, he says, go alone in your closet.
Mm-hmm.
But when he speaks and what the words that he says, it says, give us our, you know what I mean? Us. And so one of the things I'm frequently reflecting on is who is included in that us. And, you know, clearly Jesus made it very clear that those who are suffering are included in that us.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it
points us to be mindful and aware of those who are suffering. And so that's, you know, marginalized people, period, are targets for being included in the us. However, again, when you're dealing with people sharing spaces, it can become very, very complicated because let's think about a child who comes to the playground without an adult. Usually there's a lot of different reasons why the child is there without an adult. And those reasons can lend themselves to making it difficult for families who do have the ability to have adults present to interact with the child who doesn't have an adult present. There's a lot of complicated power dynamics there. There's a lot of complicated nuances that are there that child isn't going to be aware of, or they're aware of in a different way.
Sure.
And so all that being said, coming in as sort of the judge of interactions, there's a question about who needs advocacy and in what way.
Exactly.
I mean, and all of that gets very complicated and nuanced. But at the end of the day, what I'm pleased about is the fact that Melissa and I's role, along with the other neighbors, has been to try to be aware of that and try to be deliberate about it rather than just looking for easy answers and trying to respond in easy ways.
Totally.
And so we don't have a perfect setup here.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's messy, and we have a lot of debates, you know, between neighbors and all that kind of stuff. But it's a constant reminder that our society just doesn't have spaces where people can have these conversations about difficult things.
So there's just a lot of diversity, a lot of nuance, and it's not very clear. There aren't any easy answers to what it's like to be a good neighbor in such a diverse neighborhood. You're a person of color.
Right.
What's it like for you to be a good neighbor to people who perhaps have been hostile to people like you? Let's just say police, or the people gentrifying your neighborhood that don't really understand it, that are, but both of those groups of people may even challenge how you love them. Can you talk about that?
So I think about this a lot. And again, I'm always trying to, when I think about this idea of them and us, I think my line is not who you are, what your role is in society and all that kind of stuff. My line is whether or not you're willing to be considerate and treat other people as humans, right? So if you're a person who is willing to sacrifice human life and people's well-being so that you can be more comfortable and you can acquire wealth and riches, then you are my them. I have grace for everyone else. So even if you're very different and you live a very different lifestyle and have very different ideals than I have, I can understand that your lived experience has reinforced that, and that even as an adult, you can continue to have your bias towards things that are affirming or confirming things that you've already subscribed to or you feel obligated to subscribe to, right? I get that. Like, that's what people do, you know? So, you know, a police officer who was raised in a family of police officers and who comes from a community where police officers are, you know, highly regarded, and, you know, it's a great opportunity, and, you know, you don't have to get into college debt, you know, in order to become a police officer and all that. Like, I understand why people would see it as an option and why people would subscribe to it. And I also understand the subcultural components that need to be there in order to justify being aggressive with another human. You know what I mean? Like, I have to go to sleep at night. So, you know, this is a part of my job. I've got to be rough and tough as part of my job. You know, you don't have a nice, gentle football player. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be strong and represent, and that's what you have to do. And, you know, I also understand the feeling of every time I'm going into an interaction with another human, I'm stepping into a situation that could lead to my death or to an injury. And that will affect not only me, but it'll affect my family.
Totally.
And so, you know, I live that. I have always lived that. And so I get that, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I think there does need to be larger conversations, not just for police officers or for people who are supporting them and all that kind of jazz, just people in general, about how to see other people as humans, and then looking at our systems that keep people living in inhumane ways and responding to that and adjusting it. All right. So yes, you know, we'll acknowledge that poverty forces people to do a lot of inhumane things. Well, let's do something about poverty.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, you know, there's a lot of people, oh yeah, we've tried this, and well, let's keep trying. You know what I mean? We don't just stop. And there's a lot of great thinkers out there who have a lot of great ideas, and there's a lot of people who are doing things individually. But I think one of the things that's really heavy on my heart right now is the idea of genuine empowerment. People like me, do-gooders and, you know, civic engagers and church people, have often done things to help offset the damage done by selfish people or selfish groups. But something that we can inadvertently do is, instead of empowering people to transition into a different situation where they no longer have to suffer in the same way, we can often try to make the space more comfortable to help ease the suffering while people are suffering. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with trying to, you know, offset suffering.
Absolutely not.
However, one of the things that requires a lot more skill, collaboration, commitment is trying to figure out what are the systems that cause people to suffer and what work is necessary to adjust those systems so that instead of just relieving people's suffering momentarily, we help them to live into a life that is not built on suffering.
This is such a beautiful way to put it. I mean, you're hearing this, y'all. Julius is a nuanced and gracious person, meets people right where they're at, understands their context, wants to develop an intimate relationship. And despite that personal connection with his neighbors, he is saying this isn't just loving your neighbors isn't just a personal thing. If you love your neighbors, change the systems that oppress them, change the systems that force them to act in ways that are beneath them. Whether you're a brown person who grew up in poverty or a scared police officer who's hurting people, right? These are systemic problems, not personal problems. And I think that's just a radical way to see both enemy love and neighborly love. So going back to Galatians 5:14, I can see the idea now of why all the law is summarized under loving your neighbor, because that means we're addressing all the systems of hatred and oppression if we counter them with love. So neighborly love can be transformational. We can really make the world a better place just through loving it. And I think you've shared some great stories about that. I want to get to one of the hobbies you have. Julius is part of our congregation and part of our church, and one of the things that attracted you to us was that we were interested in art and music, and you're a musician, and specifically you're a drummer. You love to drum. How have you made that part of how you love your neighborhood? How is drumming? What does drumming have to do with being a good neighbor?
Well, it's interesting because when most people think about drummers, they don't want to be a neighbor with, they don't want to have a drummer as a neighbor. Drums are loud. And, most Western drummers are pretty obnoxious and inconsiderate. Well, they have a reputation for being that way, of just being like, yeah, look at how awesome I am. Look at how I drum.
Yeah, I've lived next to some people that have band practice at night, so I feel you.
Yeah. So what's beautiful about drumming has been one of my key therapies. And so for me, language is very stressful. I think a lot about language, a lot of logical thinking and college and all that stuff. There's a lot of stress that comes with words. And so when I hear sounds or deal with sounds that don't have words, then it tends to be much more soothing. And sound experiences that don't involve words tend to be very soothing. And so drumming has been a wonderful experience for me, not only because of the musical component, but also because I was able to teach myself how to drum. And so it is one of the most empowering things that I've ever experienced.
That's awesome.
Once you have the vision for the rhythm that you're trying to play, like you get samples of rhythms all the time when you're listening to music and all that kind of jazz. But once you decide, hey, this is what I want to do, well, then when you're trying it out, it's easy for you to get feedback from your body and from what the bucket or the drum set or whatever you're playing to know whether or not you're getting it. You know what I mean? And so
Totally.
I, through trial and error and through, investing time practicing, was able to transition from someone who didn't know how to deliver a beat that was in my head into the real world, into somebody who does it without thinking. You know what I mean? And so I got a training at Elwyn for our therapeutic groups that helped me to use language in order to make the drumming accessible. That was Peter Marino, Healing Beat. Now he's a 1 hour drummer. So he showed the technique of using a chant in order to help everyone to drum the same thing together. So when I taught myself, there was a lot of things that I needed to intuit. You know what I mean? And I grew up around a lot of rap and hip hop. So, nailing the beat right on and keeping the same beat for a long period of time is typical with the styles of music that I came up with. And so, for the most part, I'm able to intuit how much space before I'm supposed to come back in.
That's
Whereas
great.
when I tried to convey that and communicate that with other people who didn't have that experience, then it was hard for them to nail the space. And so using the chants and language helped to make it so that way now I can work with toddlers all the way up to the elderly, and they can drum together with other people, and everyone can have a shared experience and feelings. Like, most people feel successful. Most people can play I like drums. I like drums, and nail it and feel good. There are some people who can't nail it and are a little bit off, but there's enough of an incentive and a connection with what's going on for them to keep trying rather than just feeling like a failure and walking away. And so, art has been very important to me. I did theater and stuff in high school, and that was very instrumental in helping to shape the person that I am now. And it's a part of when I'm reading stories for the drumming, what helps to make that experience go well. But for me, art in our society is often seen as a thing that you shouldn't do if it's not profitable. And so if you can't make money off of it, you shouldn't do art. And for me, my art has not been my moneymaker. It's not been my bread and butter. It's been my therapy. And so even though I will get paid upon occasion, it's not how I, put food on the table. So my drumming with children in my community, and I actually drummed with the kids over at McPherson Library this summer.
And now with actual, you had like supplies from the hardware store to drum, right? Is that right?
Yeah. The drumming that I do in the community usually involves plastic buckets and plastic tubes, so that, again, if a toddler wants to try it, well, then they can come up. They can just hold on to the plastic bucket and whack it with a plastic tube. But the components are still there. So the effects that you get from drumming real equipment, you get from the bucket. You can get the feedback and learn, you know what I mean?
That's awesome.
You can make the beats. And so
super accessible.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks, Julius. Thanks for this conversation. So good to talk to you. Before we go, I want people to know how they can support the Hagert Street Playground and you in other ways. Can they share money? Can they share stuff find you on social media? Tell us how to do that. At
this time, we haven't been able to establish our website. We do have a page on Facebook,
and we'll link that in the show notes.
Friends of Hagert Playground. On Instagram, it's Friends of Hagert. But in terms of helping out, I mean, we have opportunities to volunteer, like helping to clean up, and we have events and all that stuff. But if we're trying to meet other neighbors who are directly in the area, it makes it hard for people to come and visit. I would say coming to visit the spaces, so coming to visit the playground and just hanging out, is a way to support it, because it makes it so that way.
That's great.
People get to use it, and it's active and it's being used appropriately.
And what's the address again, Julius?
Oh, I think it's 2050 East Hagert.
Great, they'll find it. So it's on the 2000 block of Hagert Street in Kensington.
Right. In the middle of the block. And money is always good because we do good work and we share money. We haven't been able to figure out the best way to receive donations. So I think what would make sense is if people wanted to donate for the playground through Circle of Hope. So we have a Hagert Street Playground Compassion team. If you all want to share with it, go to circleofhope.church and make sure when you go to the giving section, you write that in the memo. That's a great way to do it. Good idea, Julius. Yeah. But that being said, right now things are going well here, and we're not doing ambitious things that are needed for our core group. But we're sharing love with other spaces. So
wonderful.
That'd be good.
All right, Julius, thanks so much for this conversation. Really appreciate it. We'll catch you soon.
All right, brother.
Take care.
This last section is spiritual show and tell because we want to share with you what is nourishing to us. Maybe it will nourish you too, but at least we hope that it'll inspire you to pay attention to things that nourish your own soul and share them with others, because there's something that God does in meeting us in deep places, and when we share that with others, it's like a gift. I felt the gift of that this Sunday. I'll start us off by sharing what nourished me this week. Just worshiping in community outside. The Germantown congregation is still meeting outside in Fern Hill Park. And it was a beautiful morning. It was overcast and cool, and the breeze was blowing. And the team was leading us in singing about coming home to God with laughter and running. The song was All the Way Home. And as we are singing, one of the kids among us hops up with her bubble wand and starts running around the whole congregation, and bubbles were just floating out behind her and drifting over all of us. And then other kids were inspired and they hopped up with her, and they are literally making a circle around the whole congregation as we are singing All the Way Home I Run. And it was so beautiful. It just made me so happy in that moment. Just the whole scene. The children and their joy, worshiping outdoors, like opening up this, just a different kind of freedom in connection with God. Yeah. Under these huge London plane trees. Do you know what I'm talking about? They look like sycamore trees, but they're actually London plane trees. Anyway, just all of that whole experience was nourishing to me, and I was so grateful to be able to share it in community.
I had a pandemic goal to be able to identify my local trees, but that my friend actually bought me a little identification guide because I said on one of the probably on the Sunday meeting, I said one time, I want to do this, and someone sent me something. It was awesome, and I do know what London plane trees are, but I actually haven't achieved this pandemic goal very well because I haven't studied. But I already knew London plane trees because they're in Clark Park, which is my native park. That's my childhood park.
Something nourished my soul in our Sunday meeting as well. I felt some of those Holy Spirit connections. I got to meet a brand new friend, a young woman from the neighborhood named Kelly. She came in as the worship team was practicing and said, and we were chatting, and I said, "Oh, how did you find us?" And she said, "Brian, one of your homeless friends on the corner, told me that I had to come to this meeting tonight, and I took it as a sign from God that I had to come." Wow. And so I was like, "What? That is so great." So she went out to get food, and she came back with Brian, and it was just a great opportunity to get to know Brian more too. And I'm amazed and enjoying how God is working these days and these new friendships.
Well, I was on vacation last week, and that was nourishing to my soul, swimming in a lake. But I was also reading novels by Wendell Berry, and Remembering by Wendell Berry might have shot to the at least top 5 novels I've ever read. Just an amazing little book. Loved it. And Wendell Berry is a poet as well as a novelist and an essayist. And this paragraph that I want to read you from the end of the book is poetry. It's beautiful. This is a bit of spoilers, so I don't think it ruins reading the book, but you would know that this is the trajectory of the book, and so I'm giving you plenty of opportunity to skip the next 30 seconds. This is like a vision or a dream that the main character is having. And now, above and beyond the bird's song, Andy hears a more distant singing. Whether of voices or instruments, sounds or words, he cannot tell. It is at first faint and then stronger, filling the sky and touching the ground, and the birds answer it. He understands presently that he is hearing the light. He is hearing the sun, which now has risen, though from the valley it is not yet visible. The light's music resounds and shines in the air and over the countryside, drawing everything into the infinite, sensed but mysterious pattern of its harmony. From every tree and leaf, grass blade, stone, bird, and beast, it is answered and again answers. The creatures sing back their names, but more than their names, they sing their being. The world sings, the sky sings back. It is one song, the song of many members of one love, the whole song sung and to be sung, resounding in each of its moments, and it is light. Amen.
Beautiful.
Amen.
I want to try to thread a needle here because the source of the nourishment of my soul is a rather dark circumstance. But peacemakers don't often get to see and experience, I think, in our war-torn world, the wisdom and the rationality of peacemaking. And as the Afghanistan war comes to an end, and it's quite a debacle over there, and there's plenty of blame to go around, and I'm not interested in litigating that. What I want to say is that Jesus told us that if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And Christians have a chance now to say that, and they've expressed this. There's a way to witness. The way of peace and the way of love is how you share freedom, liberty, all the good things that we hold on to in this world can be administered and shared with people, not through violence. And what I'm encouraged by is the irrationality and impracticality of peace and peacemaking is so often made known to me, because I feel like the fool in the conversation. And we're seeing something else. And even in the in how Afghanistan has fallen apart, and women and children and others in Afghanistan are hurting, I think Christians can again speak in a way that protects the least of these. We can talk about, and we do talk about, the biblical really demand to be welcoming of the stranger and of the refugee. This is a moment where in such devastation, Christians can and are saying things that heal and restore. And there's no joy in, being right about peace, but there is a comfort in knowing that the Lord we serve operates in a whole different way. So I feel even blessed by the opportunity to be a peacemaker. And my hope is that this creates a whole generation of peacemakers. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering about the conflict over there, we have another way of doing it. This is a reason to follow Jesus, and to hold on to the peace he gives us within and the peace that he expresses outside, our Prince of Peace. So that feels encouraging to me. I don't have another way. I only have one ruler. I want to be ruled by peace, like Paul says in Colossians. So I hope we can keep doing that together, and you can do that with us.
There is another way. Amen.
I hope that all of this encourages you, and whatever it stirred up, write to us. Tell us what you're thinking. Keep this dialogue going and be blessed. Until next time, go in peace.